question comes from Symphonics, and it is in response to the death of the Kronos, a video I did in December 2021. And Symphonics writes, at 32 minutes in, I doubt there will be any more Kronos OS or firmware software updates. The last one, 3.13 and 1.01 respectively, were in March 2019. It would make no sense to introduce changes to a stable product or any new functionality at this point. True, support will continue for a while for existing hardware and software configurations. And while I agree that the Kronos is an incredibly stable platform, the last hurrah would be to fix the final issues before the operating system is finally locked. They did this on the Oasis. The Oasis had a final release which fixed a number of bugs and also unlocked a number of things in the operating system, because they were no longer selling those areas of the operating system, so increased functionality, etc. So they basically released the last operating system released on the Oasis. Effectively was the last hurrah that removed things like license keys and other things like that basically made all the functionality available on the platform. And I would hope Korg would do the same. Sorry, I've got the hiccups. Korg would do the same with the Kronos now that they've actually discontinued support. It didn't happen until about a year after support was discontinued, though. But we will see what this big corporation is gonna bring to market and what they're gonna do with the legacy Kronos before they put it to bed. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next one comes from Sean Curran in response to Underwhelmed by the Roland D-20, a video I did in December 2021. He writes, "Hi, great video, excellent discussion in the community, so I figured I'd put my thoughts on record. The Roland D-20 was my first synth, and like most, I couldn't afford a D50. No, that was the problem. But I think the D20, I've always said, the D20 was a better workstation, the D50 was a better synth. But not by a lot. However, I saw enough similarities between the sounds to get by. Also, having a sequencer on board meant I could sequence the other synth parts, and I was only missing a good piano patch. However, in a mix on stage, they got the job done. Once all 8 parts were rocking, this was a very convincing synth at the time. Perfect for 80s music. Absolutely agree. Few requests. I'd love to see how you reinforce your sound with a D110 or a D10 or a D20. It is a very interesting idea to leverage one of them, but with today's super workstations like the Phantom, I wonder how that is. I'd love to see the D20 sound library spin up, showcasing a few of the D10, D20 110 cards that were out there during the time. I still have the factory Roland cards, but I know there was a world of ROM cards out there. One particular were the voice crystals. Sadly, they are very rare nowadays, and they are. And I do have some. I have a number of voice crystal cards. Firstly, thank you for letting the community know your views on the D20. It was overshadowed by the Roland D50, but I've always said it was a better keyboard. The studio is back. When the studio is back up and running, and I did say in the new year, but I think it's going to be a little bit longer, I will do some material about these sound modules as reinforcement. In the short, the way I use them is as follows: to layer sounds on top of each other, just to fatten the sound out. And yes, the Kronos can layer sounds and do it subtly in many different ways, but this is a simple, if you haven't got a Kronos, or if you're not using a Kronos, or if you're not using something, the D10, the D20, the U series Rocklers can add a lot of depth to a sound without costing you a lot of money. And adding them into the stereo mix, like sweeping pads that moves between left and right fields, or is static in the left and the right. And this all comes down to sort of let me just finish this, I'll come back to and basically the cards are a bit scarce. I have got all 15 of the original Roland cards and a number of the sound designer cards with the new sound recording. Maybe I'll do this in a video later on. But what I was trying to say is, if you think about a stereo mix, you've got a field of sound. Okay, so you've got from the far left to the far right and centre, right? And what you have to decide is, where do you want to pitch the sound tonally, and also where do you want to pitch the sound in terms of where you want the listener to hear. So, when you're doing the mix, most people make the mistake that the sound has to be dead centre, and the sound doesn't have to be dead centre. It can be far right or far left, depending on what that sound is. And quite often it's quite nice to actually off-put a sweeping pad or something into one of the channels more than the other channel, because the listener is then fooled into thinking there's movement going on. And mix engineers will really jump in on this sort of kind of area. I'm not a mix engineer, but I do like, when I'm putting stuff together, to sweep sounds from the left to the right, and not necessarily have the same sound across both stereo channels. You can have more influence in one and less influence in the other, and then just play with it. It becomes a very interesting subject, and this is how really experienced mix engineers really push the boundaries in terms of getting the mix right, and also being able to actually get the sounds to layer into the background with vocals and other instruments that you want to include in that mix.